the pastor said from the pulpit,
he started to say, we want you.
So we are asking you to lay down your conscience. Those were his words.
We want you to lay your conscience aside.
Is anybody else hearing this? Like, the pastor's telling people to lay down their conscience and submit to the church.
I was raised a Seventh-day Adventist.
Well, I was actually raised Seventh-day Adventist. Had, I believe a conversion, at least as much as I could experience as a child.
In college, I got into the world. I got into alcohol and parties and really bad things.
And especially as I went through college, I really fell away from things, even though I went to an Adventist university.
I became very, very unhappy. I dealt with depression, and it was just a really unhappy time. And my husband and I were both together. It's about the first 10 years of our marriage or so that we were living this way, stuck in the cycle of addiction with food, with substances.
My wife and I really had some pretty dramatic, painful things happen in our marriage, and really were kind of up against a wall.
In January 2016, we had hit our rock bottom, and we had a born-again experience. God really reached his hand out to us and saved us from ourselves.
I praise God. We were both actually driven into the arms of Christ at the same time.
And it was the most beautiful time of our lives.
For the first time in our lives, we started to reach out to other people. We started to have friends for the first time. We found a local church.
We didn't really have friends to speak of that we were close to. Because of our lifestyle, things were kind of shallow. We started attending a local Adventist church, and God led us there, and we met some really beautiful people.
We never looked back. We never tried to go back to our old lifestyle. We just loved what we were finding. That was so much better than what we had before.
As we made friends, real, genuine friends, we would get together during the week. We would get together often on Friday evenings and pray together, sing, study the Bible. And we have 2 small children. And, our friends genuinely loved our kids. Our kids, whenever any of them would come over, would just be so excited. And it was like getting adopted into another family. And there was a support there that we just never had before, where if we were having a rough time, they were there, and vice versa. And it just felt really safe and secure, and I just felt like this is so right. This is what God intended for a body, to have that level of intimacy.
And it was really the first real friendships I had ever had in my life. My wife didn't even really know all the stuff from my history, and the things that I had been through. I'd been so closed off, and so through my conversion, I was opening up and being honest with her, but not just her. I was also honest with these new friends, and so I was experiencing friendship. For the first time, I was loved and accepted just the way that I was.
So we had been going to church for about a year and a half, I think it was, and I was watching a YouTube video, and it came up on my feed, and it was about the Trinity, and I had never heard of any controversy, or this was all kind of new to me. And I remember watching it, and in the video certain questions were presented, and I was like, that's a pretty good question.
My wife and I were told several times that the fire that you get when you first come in, that's going to wear off. Don't think it's going to last forever, because people didn't want us to be disappointed. And I think it did die down, at least a little bit. But we always, I praise God that I had her to go through it with. And so we would kind of push each other, kind of provoke each other to good works. We would study new things. We were always into prophecy and things like that, wanting to know more.
I remember that when I watched it, there were questions presented that did make me wonder, and made me wonder, well, what do I believe about God? And is Jesus the Son of God? And what does this all mean? And it was just really overwhelming. So I prayed. I said, Lord, I'd like to know the answers to these questions, but I don't know how to get the answers, and I'm just going to trust you that you will reveal the truth to me. You will show me in your time. And so I'm just going to set this aside for now, but I did pray that and believe that he would. And then I kind of forgot about it for a while.
Studying together really added a lot to the spiritual experience. We would bring in our friends, and we would have, Friday night Bible study at the Dexters kind of became a thing.
And then it was about 9 months or so after that, we were watching some sermons, and a video came up on somebody's testimony about how they had recently been disfellowshipped for their belief on this topic. And it was somebody that we had seen before and that we respected, and we were my husband and I were kind of shocked, and we couldn't believe that this person was kicked out of the church.
He put up this video called my situation, or I'll update my situation, or something like that. And he gave this testimony about how his church had disfellowshipped him.
And I remember it was at that moment that I felt like this is important. I need to know one way or the other, because if people are getting kicked out of the church for this, then this is kind of a big deal. And because I don't have the answers, I need to get the answers.
And just hearing the way that he had been treated was very strange to me, because this is somebody that I had been following for a while and watching his videos, and it just made me think, I need to know why did they do this to him, because he didn't really seem to understand why he was treated the way that he was treated.
So that was when I kind of felt that nudge, I need to go forward with looking into this more. My husband was a little bit more skeptical.
And it turned out it was all about wanting to take the Bible as it reads, and believe in God as being who he says he is, and avoiding using any kind of man-made ideas or philosophies. And so that was kind of how we got into the study on the Godhead, on who God is, and who his Son is, and who the Spirit is. And we just started to study and study and study.
I started studying my Bible. I watched a few videos and looked up the verses. I looked into spirit of prophecy, and it was a period of a couple of weeks that, as I was reading in the Bible, things just started jumping out at me. And
it started to stick out from everywhere. It actually, I think it hit her a little bit harder at first.
And I remember just having these moments of what? The Bible really says that?
But it was very much prayerful study that we would pray, please God, let us see this with new eyes. Let us let go of our expectations, all the things from our past that might influence our understanding.
I had never read Proverbs 8 in my life, and when I read that, I couldn't believe it, that the Bible actually describes him coming forth, and that was kind of unreal to me, but it's the Bible says it. Who am I to question it?
This is different than the popular understanding within Seventh-day Adventism and within Christendom.
There was just a couple of like light bulb moments for me, I guess, where I felt like the Lord was really impressing the truth on me. And it's hard to put it into words because it really was, it was a spiritual experience. He was opening my eyes. And one of the times when I just had those moments of like, this is the truth was, I remember I was reading when Jesus was with the disciples and he was saying, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said, "It's not flesh and blood that has revealed this to you, but my Father." And then it was Peter's declaration that Jesus was the Son of the living God, that was to be the rock, the foundation of the church. And I was like, wow, this very fact is so important. This is my foundation.
And at that point, we started to reach out to some of our friends and to ask them, hey, could you look at this? Could you study this with us? And initially, everybody said, absolutely, yeah, we'll look into this, we'll study this.
And I was convicted that this was the truth. And then I started to immediately want to share it because, at that point, I wasn't thinking about consequences or any of the negative things that could happen. I was just so excited that I had prayed and that God was answering my prayer and that he was manifesting himself to me. And I was just so excited to open my Bible and spend time with God in the morning and even throughout the day. I feel bad. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and there was some days when I would just kind of be so into my Bible and wanting to share that I maybe didn't pay attention to the kids as much as I should have. I just was torn between doing my duties and spending time with God and the Word. But it was just an amazing time, and I just had some beautiful experiences.
I told my best friend, that we were studying this, along with some of our other very close friends, and the initial reaction was a little bit disturbing, almost like an assumption was made, even from that very first meeting, that, you guys are fanatical. You guys are, you have fallen, you're one of those people.
There was a time when I went for a walk one day and I just opened my heart up to God, and I said, I was talking to Christ, to Jesus, and saying, I believe that you are my comforter and that it's not someone else, and I believe that you're here with me. And I was so overwhelmed with his presence, the knowledge that he was with me, that it moved me to tears. And I just, it was a powerful experience. And I had multiple experiences like that.
Everywhere I opened it, he was just revealing who he was.
I've heard about people getting disciplined for this. Obviously, that was kind of what got me into studying it. But I never in a million years thought that would happen to me. That's not... I went to a really awesome church. I had a bunch of healthy relationships, close friends. And actually, the first person that I shared with my mom, I remember that I called her one day and I could hear the worry in her voice, like, well, where is this going? And I could tell she was kind of concerned that maybe I was getting off on a tangent. But at the same time, she didn't really have an answer. And so she felt like, well, she needed to study this and know. And so she said, well, Ariel, I'm going to pray about it and I'm going to study and, and God will show me. And I think in her mind, she was probably thinking that she was going to prove me wrong. But she was studying then at the same time. And then all of a sudden, she was seeing the same things that I had seen. And so we would go call each other back and forth and I'd be like, Mom, you won't believe this. And she would, respond and be like, that's amazing. And then she'd show me something. So it was like, I wasn't on the journey alone. And then, of course, my husband also. We were all kind of studying this together. And then we started to share with a few of our friends. And, I didn't want to come across, I understood that this is a little bit controversial, because basically what I'm saying is that, I don't agree with the way that our church currently teaches on this issue. I believe what our church originally believed. And so automatically you say, I don't believe what the church believes now, that's going to be seen as controversial. So I just wanted my friends to look into it and to take it seriously and to consider it. I wanted them to have the same experience that I had.
God's telling me, He's showing me, I'm not crazy here. This is what it says. And going and trying to start these, trying to continue to study with some people. We had a meeting with the pastor and with my best friend.
So we shared with a couple of friends one weekend, and then the following weekend we shared with a couple of more friends, and they didn't really have a solid answer in favor of the Trinity. They were kind of like, well, we haven't really studied this too much either. And they acted like they would study it with us. So I was really hopeful. And then as we revealed it a little more, I didn't want to be secretive about it. I kind of felt like we should just be open and honest and share with our pastor what we've been finding out. I didn't want him to think that we were doing anything underhanded. So my husband and I invited the pastor over and one of our close friends, and we just basically told him what we had been studying, what we were seeing.
And they shared a couple Bible verses, and when I would ask them my questions, or my wife would ask them questions, their response would be, well, we just don't see it that way.
And, immediately we could tell that he was worried, that this was not good news for him. He said that he had encountered this issue before, that this doesn't go anywhere, that this is a distraction. I mean, he was saying it in a loving way, but at the same time, I didn't seem very hopeful that he would, be open to studying this. Like, he had kind of already made a decision that this wasn't true.
I mean, it seemed so clear to me, and it was confusing that they didn't see it. Not that, that's not going to end a relationship for me anyway if somebody doesn't see what I see, but it was definitely disheartening.
That was a little bit disappointing, but it was a few weeks later, we had another meeting with the pastor again, and this time my mom was involved in the meeting, and, again, we tried to share, and it was basically, we were again encouraged to kind of lay this issue aside and don't go into it anymore. Don't study. It was revealed at the meeting. We were very open about who we had shared with.
We disclosed to them all of the people, all of our friends who we had started and who we'd gone to and asked to study this with us, and that were currently engaging in studying with us. And I remember after that meeting, feeling discouraged in the sense that they weren't seeing what we were seeing, but encouraged because they were saying, yes, we're going to study this with you.
And when we had shared with our friends before, they said, yeah, we'll study this, absolutely. We should know this, so we will study it out with you. Well, after that second meeting with the pastor, then it was like dead silence. We didn't hear anything for a couple of months. And it seemed obvious to me that I think our friends had either lost interest or were really busy, or maybe they actually, felt like it was a bad idea to study. They didn't directly state that to us, but that's kind of what we were thinking. And I just remember it being such a bittersweet time because, we were growing in our relationship with God and having this experience that is unlike anything we had experienced, and wanting to share that with the people that we're closest to, and to see almost the indifference. It was difficult, and I'm very grateful that, my mom and my husband were kind of at my side and experienced it with me. But I wanted more people to see it.
It was a huge test of our faith that, I mean, for the next 2 months, it was really silent. We didn't really hear much of anything. The people that we had been studying with said that they didn't want to study with us anymore. They wanted to study it on their own, and or they just stopped contacting us altogether, which was very disheartening. I mean, these are our best friends, and this is a difficult topic, and we wanted to really have some people to go through this with. We did have some people that were still willing to study with us, which was awesome, including my wife's parents.
For about 2 months, we heard nothing, and I think that I kind of sensed that this issue was going to just be swept under the rug and that people were done talking about it. But I wasn't done talking about it. I continued to want to share and for people to take it seriously. So I remember one night my husband and I watched an update, Matt and Lori's update on where they were in their journey around the country. And in the video at the end, they said, we're going to be going to the Northeast.
And my wife and I looked at each other and we're like, oh, that's awesome. Maybe we can go see him.
It's just like so excited to think that we could actually go to a meeting with like people who believed this truth. It was just so exciting. And then when I looked at the calendar, I was really disappointed because that particular weekend we weren't going to be around. We were already committed to a church event.
So we prayed about it, and we decided that the best thing to do would to simply, if it was God's will that we should reach out to Matt and find out if he would be willing maybe to come up into, northern New England, maybe not just Massachusetts.
I just thought, man, he's going to be so close. I wonder if he could come just a little further north. And I was a little bit, part of me, terrified to ask because I didn't know how that would be received up here with our friends. But at the same time, I just had this really strong conviction to reach out. And, if it was God's will, then he would open the doors. And if it wasn't, then he'd close the doors. And
really expecting, him to say no, expecting Matt to say, no, I'm really busy. He's a family of 4 in an RV traveling the country. So I would imagine, the plans were probably pretty full.
I ended up reaching out by email and asking and prayed about it. And then Matt reached back and said it'd be a possibility. Give me a call. So at this point, I was really getting a little bit like, what am I getting myself into? But I just prayed again, Lord, your will be done.
God had that, I believe, out of a divine appointment there. It was so rapid. We went from, wondering, should we even reach out to him, to, okay, he's going to be up here in 3 weeks, like in the course of a day and a half or something like that. And God really worked some miracles in order to make that happen.
I was, kind of scared but excited at what God, was going to do. I invited some people from our church.
This was about 2.5 months after all of these promises, but then it had been silent. And so really hoping that we could get connected again, to our friends, because they had kind of been separated for a while. So I didn't know it at the time, but my wife had put the Matt Dooley flyer on our Friday night Bible study chat, right? Because we had our Friday night Bible studies that were ongoing, and we had our select group of friends plus anybody that we wanted to personally invite to come out there. It wasn't like an open church invitation. It was kind of, if you know somebody who goes, then you're welcome to come. Just because we couldn't fit the whole church at our house.
I did let them know. I made them aware that this is non-Trinitarian, and we the weekend before Matt and Lori came up at this church event, there was a meeting
we got there on Friday and went to bed pretty quickly. But on Sabbath morning, I was approached by one of my friends, a pretty close friend, and this was where I saw a very dramatic change in the spirit that they manifested towards me. And this was on a Sabbath morning. It's a beautiful sunny morning up in northern Maine, out on a lake. But he came up to me and he said, how could you have done this? And I was really taken back. I kind of got defensive a little bit and felt hot. And what are you talking about? And he was like, you invited somebody up here who's going to come and try to tear our church apart, and I can't believe you would do this. And I told him I didn't understand why he would think that. That everything that I had seen from Matt, the sermons and things that I had watched, there was nothing tearing down the church or nothing even that would hint at heresy or anything that was biblically unsound. And his response to me, from me telling him that, was that he was going to destroy me, my reputation with the church, and that he was going to make sure that I couldn't get anybody to go to the meeting. I hadn't invited anybody yet. My wife had put it on the Bible study chat, but I didn't know that yet, and I hadn't invited anyone. I was really taken back. I wasn't too sure how to respond. He stormed away. He was pretty upset, and I felt really bad. I don't want to upset anybody, and my best friend is standing there, and he said, I'm sorry that that he was so aggressive. And that was kind of all that he said, and it was time to move on to whatever the next activity was. And I just remember going up to the room and just wondering, why is this happening?
They again expressed concern. They expressed concern that we had stepped out and that we had, extended this invitation, and we're just concerned with the decisions that my husband and I were making, and again wanting us to lay this issue aside. And the request was actually made that we retract the invitation and cancel the plan. We weren't willing to do that. But I remember just feeling really torn, because I felt God pulling me in one direction, and yet at the same time the people that I loved and respected and were so close to were saying, what you're doing is wrong.
When my wife and I were studying this, especially over those 2 months where it was silent, hearing testimonies of people saying how their church had reacted and how they had basically been persecuted and pushed out of the church, and thinking, and my wife and I discussing it and saying, there's no way that this would happen. These are real friends, because we had never had friends before, and we know what friends are now because of these people. And so we thought, there's no way they wouldn't do that to us. Our pastor, this the kindest, most loving person I've ever met, would never do that. He would never be okay with that. And I remember that day at Camp Lorwell, going back up to my room and thinking that this is what they were talking about. Just as much as it lights the fire within me to want to study more and just to study with anybody that's willing to, and I feel like the Bible's coming alive. For somebody that's closed to it, it's as if it has the opposite effect. Like they don't want to talk to me. They don't want to reason with me. They don't want to hear any of it. They don't even want to give me any evidence for why I'm wrong. They just want to get away from me. And I had never experienced that from any of these people before. I mean, they were my closest friends.
One of the individuals from our church contacted the people that we had invited to come to the meetings and discouraged people from going. So there was all sorts of stories going around about, what my husband and I believed, that we believed Jesus was a created being. We didn't believe in the Holy Spirit, or that what we believed was pantheistic. And yet it seemed like nobody would just come and sit down and open the Bible with us and listen to what we were trying to say and let us, show from the Bible why we believed what we believed. So it was definitely, my faith was being tested, and, there were times when I had to cry out to God, because I'm not somebody that's used to standing out and being different. I've always liked to please people, to follow, what I'm told to do, and to just make peace. So this was not heading in that direction. After the meetings, after Matt and Lori left, it was actually the following weekend, I believe, that our pastor selected a group from our church. I think there was probably 10 people or so, and said, you know what, we're going to study this issue with you.
So we had a series of meetings, and with the goal that we were going to be able to dive into this doctrine, to do a doctrinal study on who God is, which is what we've wanted to do that ever since, with other people, ever since we started to share it with people.
And I was so excited. I was like, yes, finally, they're gonna look at this, and if we pray and we seek God together, He will unify us. I just knew God would unify us. And so, the first meeting we had, it was stated that before we go into the actual doctrinal study, there's a few things that we got to study first.
They wanted to study a few things, and the first thing they really wanted to study, and we did it for several weeks, of like 2 or 3 hour studies once a week. And we went over church unity, we went over church authority, and the body model, and how it only works if you submit to the body. That was kind of the big focus.
We had the meeting at our house, and handouts were given with all these Spirit of Prophecy quotes talking about submission to the church. And when you read all of the quotes that were put together, it kind of painted a picture like you just always submit to what the church says, and that if you ever go against it, that it's almost rebellious. And so I would just have to, it was kind of like, well, what is the right thing here? Because it's pretty persuasive. And then I would read other statements that weren't presented at those meetings afterwards. I would read statements about standing for truth, and the scriptures are our safeguard, and we go by the Bible and the Bible alone, and that we don't have unity at the cost of truth. And so then when I would read those together, I think I got a fuller picture that it's not just a blind submission, but what are we going to be unified on? It's got to be truth.
And the further we got into it, the more it seemed like really it was almost as if there was this elephant in the room, this message of we're just trying to prepare you for when we say you have to set this down. You have to let this go. And eventually we began to talk about, there were 2 presentations on church history.
Now we're going to look at how our church has developed historically. And so wanting to show how, we're not going to talk about the doctrine of the Trinity itself. We're not going to go into your specific beliefs, but we're just going to see why the church, or how the church has changed its views progressively. So my husband and I were given an opportunity to present our perspective. And
those were fantastic. Ariel did a bunch of work on it, and she put all this effort into it and shared the church history of where this doctrine came from. And it was incredible.
So I put together an outline of material showing what our fundamental beliefs were, and all of the statements that Ellen White made about the foundation, and how the first 50 years were were basically our safeguard, and not one jot or tittle has changed, and just the pillars of our faith concerning the personality of God, and just these powerful statements. So I presented that one particular Sabbath, and then the next Sabbath, they presented their view.
That the same friend who told me that he was going to ruin my influence was asked by the pastor to present the church's perspective, which turned out to be Jerry Moon and Leroy Froome's writings. That was primarily what the whole meeting was about.
And I remember being a little bit frustrated, because from the very beginning, all that my husband and I, wanted to do was to come together, not one person prove your point and we're going to prove our point and kind of have a debate, but let's come together and see what the Bible says. But it was very clearly turning into a debate format where, who has the best argument.
And then we finally get to the point where, okay, we're finally going to have our first meeting, the beginning of a doctrinal study. That was the way it was in my mind. I was wrong, and that was not their perspective. We got there hoping that, okay, we're just going to open our Bibles and start reading about who God is.
The whole time it was a test, but I kept thinking, I'm willing to go through the hurdles. Okay, one more meeting. Okay, another meeting, and then we're going to get to what we've been just praying for and hoping for, which is the Bible. Because once everybody, really looks at the Bible, then they'll all see it. That's what I was thinking, or hoping for anyway. So we got to our first meeting where we were going to be given the opportunity to share from the Word why we believe what we do about God. And I remember, praying about it and just asking God to lead and guide. And when we went there,
and we got there, and they said, okay, you're gonna present for 1 hour, and then we're gonna present for 1 hour. It was like, that was crushing, because that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to open the Bible together and to search together. But we prayed, and my wife and I we just dove in, and we just started going through scriptures. Like, okay, well, here's a big long list of scriptures about God. What do these say? And just start jumping in and starting to build doctrine.
We presented our views on how the Father is the one God of the Bible, because it's a lot of information to handle. So my understanding was we were going to be doing this, and by succession, several meetings, going over one part of it and then another part. So one part the Father, another part Jesus is the only begotten Son, and then the Holy Spirit. Well, so we went in and we started presenting our understanding of God being the Father from the Bible. And I remember we were sitting in a circle, and as we were sharing the verses, it was just dead quiet. It was like you could hear a pin drop.
The whole time that we presented, you could have heard a pin drop. I mean, there was almost no commentary at all. There was a couple points and I think one or two comments from other people, both fairly oppositional. That things like, well, what are you trying to say? And it's like, I'm not trying to say anything. I'm reading the Bible. And
I just remember just getting a little bit anxious and thinking, this isn't really how I pictured this. Nobody's really seeming to be pulled in.
So we got to the end of our allotted time, and okay, now it's their turn. And they started out by saying, well, we think that there was obviously a miscommunication with what our plans were for tonight, but we're going to go ahead and move forward.
And then it was shortly after we presented those texts that we were told, we really believe that you are under a satanic delusion. And, it was basically told to us that they had intended that this night was going to be the last night. There were not going to be any further studies. And I was just devastated. I couldn't believe it. And to be told that they think that I'm, under this delusion.
and they handed out this pamphlet on, it was a whole bunch of quotes from, and they were from a Catholic theology class that was given at some Jesuit university. I don't know exactly which one. And that basically what they were trying to do is connect the way that the Catholics were presenting God in this particular theology class to what we were trying to portray from the Bible. And so I basically raised my hand, or interrupted, said, "Wait, what are we doing? What's the purpose of this?" And they said, "Well, what did you think the purpose of it was?" And I said, "Well, instead of giving them the purpose of what I thought they were trying to do with this Catholic curriculum thing, I said, well, I thought the purpose here was to have a doctrinal study on who God is, and that was what we've been asking for from the very, very beginning." And they said, "Well, we've done that, and you guys don't agree." And to which I said, we haven't done this yet. And I remember Ariel, she kind of shuts down when things get a little bit heated up. I tend to just work louder and hotter when things get heated up. So, I kept reiterating that we haven't had that study, that we haven't studied the doctrine, and that I want to study the doctrine. Please, you have all promised, everybody in the room had promised me that they would do this, and none of them are doing it. None of them are willing to do it.
Was just heartbreaking, and I remember I just sat in silence for, a lot of the time, just saying, "God, what's happening? What's happening to my family?" And when we got home that night, I was just so depressed. I was in such a place of just despair.
We left that night just feeling really discouraged. A lot of it had to do with the prayer that happened at the end, because the pastor led out in prayer at the end of the meeting and said, "Steve and Ariel are completely deceived, and we ask that you would show them the light and show them how much we love them." Something along those lines. But it was from the position that there's absolutely no way that having a doctrinal study on who God is going to be of any help, because we are already taken into this deception. And that hurt a lot, to think that we never even got to go over any of it. This is, and they would say things like, "We've seen this before. We know that this has torn churches apart before, and you're just one of them now because of what happened." That was really, really painful. And
finally, after 3 days, I just knew I had to talk to God. I had to just tell Him. I had to tell Him how I felt. I needed to open up my heart. So I did, and I just told God, I don't know what to do anymore. These people that I love and respect are telling me this and are pleading with me, and yet it goes against everything that you've shown me. But I'm willing to do anything. If I have somehow been wrong, if I've been totally deluded, as they say, then please show me, and I will gladly go. I will apologize and say I've been wrong. I just want to do what you want me to do. And I just had this sense like, God, I need to know, and I need you to show me. And I got out my Bible, and there have been times in the past when I've kind of opened the Bible up, and God has shown me something, just from where I happened to open. And I was going to do that, but then I felt Him say to me, "No, go to where you left off." And I had been reading from Luke in my morning worship. Of course, it had been a few days since I had read. So I picked up my Bible and I turned to where I had left off. And I left off in Luke chapter 10. And my eyes just went right to verse 21. And it says, In that hour Jesus rejoiced in spirit and said, I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in thy sight. All things are delivered to me of my Father, and no man knoweth who the Son is but the Father, and who the Father is but the Son, and he to whom the Son will reveal him. And he turned him unto his disciples, and said privately, Blessed are the eyes which see the things that ye see. For I tell you that many prophets and kings have desired to see those things which ye see, and have not seen them, and to hear those things which ye hear, and have not heard them. And when I read that, I knew God had just spoken to me. He had just answered my prayer, and I was filled with a peace that, despite the conflict and the losses I was suffering, that I was doing what he wanted, and that's all that I wanted. And it just gave me a refreshed courage and energy to stand firm and to continue on this path. And I knew there was no going back.
It was a little bit after that the pastor said that he wanted to meet with me, and he wanted to talk to me about some things. And I said, absolutely. And so we set up a time for me to meet and talk with him. And when I showed up, there were 4 or 5 other men there, some of my closest friends. And he told me that if I wouldn't lay it down, if I wouldn't lay this down, that he and all of the other men in that room were going to recommend that the nominating committee not consider my wife and I to hold positions in the church. And I said, well, what do you mean by lay it down? And we went back and forth on that for a while, because they were being a little bit elusive, or maybe I'm being overly analytical. It could be that. And I want to know specific, what am I going to be agreeing to if I agree to this? What we came to was, what they were asking was, I would have to commit to never speak about, first of all, to never talk to anybody about the doctrine of who God is. That was part of it. The other part was, I couldn't present scriptures or quotes from the Spirit of Prophecy that I believed conflicted with the popular view in the church. And I said, I told them, I have to go pray about this. I didn't need to pray to know whether or not I was willing to do that. I needed to pray to figure out how to respond.
From that time on, things just continued accelerating with the distance that was happening with our friends. We didn't see each other as much. There wasn't as much reaching out. And we began to start feeling like we were isolated. And, when we would go to church, in the past, we've just always shared what we've learned from the Bible, opened up our hearts, but it was different because now we knew what people thought of us. Now I didn't feel at liberty to share. There was so many times when I would want to share, but I knew that what I would share wouldn't be welcomed. So it began to change our worship experience.
I wrote a letter, and I tried to be very respectful, tried to state the facts as they were. There are terms, specifically Trinity, co-eternal, co-equal, God the Spirit, God the Son. These terms are not in the Bible. And so because there's not a plain thus saith the Lord for them, even if you want to have that idea or that picture in your head or whatever that is, I don't want to stand on those terms. I didn't feel able to agree to never talk to anybody about this ever.
You can believe, it's okay to believe differently, but you just can't share that with anybody. And I would just think about Bible verses like how we're not to hide our light under a bushel, and we're to be a city on a hill, and how we are to give a reason for our faith, be prepared to give an answer. And I just thought, with this amazing truth of God sending his only begotten Son, his real Son, and how Jesus is our comforter, and his Spirit is what lives in us and gives us victory. How could I omit certain things and kind of tiptoe? I just didn't see how I could possibly do that. And so I became faced with a situation, and not just me, but also my parents and my husband, of that if we agreed to what was being asked of us, then if the next day we run into somebody and God is wanting us to share, we would either have to share and then we would have lied to, we would have broken our vow, or we would have to say, sorry, God, I took a vow and so I can't share. And both of those were unacceptable options.
And there were 2 other meetings that happened while I wasn't there. And it was during those meetings that they said that they were going to move forward with this fellowship of not just my wife and I, but my wife and my whole family, all 4 of us and the kids, and then my wife's parents as well.
Never in the million years have I ever thought that I would be faced with this situation. I mean, I had lived out in the world. I had done, worldly things that certainly would be worthy of disfellowship, I'm sure. And there was no discipline there. That was completely fine. But the minute that I'm, really connecting with God and trying to do the right thing is when I'm being faced with being disciplined. And so that was just a little bit mind-blowing. But we prayed about it the whole way, earnestly prayed to do the right thing. And so finally, when we were given the ultimatum, we all said, we're sorry, we can't comply with the requests. It
was on Sabbath. They were going to do it after sundown. And there had been no reprimand at all. No formal reprimand, no censorship, no anything. I was still serving in my position. My wife was still serving in her position. I went in and taught Sabbath school that morning at church.
The business meeting happened to be on a Saturday evening. So we went to church that Sabbath. My husband taught Sabbath school. We worshiped. My parents and I, we gathered after church and we prayed together. We shared. We read the Bible together. We just, came to God together for strength to stand for what we were going to have to go through that night.
The day before the business meeting for the disfellowship, I got this text message from my best friend. He says a couple things, but the thing that really struck me was he said that that he regards me as a believer who is living in open sin and rebellion. And no such accusation had ever been made toward me, ever. No such presentation of, this is your sin.
And on our drive to the church that evening, we sang hymns in the car, and we just had this peace that I think we knew what was coming, but it was okay because God was going to take care of us. So one thing that my mom did pray, and she prayed this individually. She told me about it afterwards. She prayed that, there was a lot of people there, and she prayed that God would somehow reveal to the people what it was that they were really asking us to do and why it was wrong. And so God answered that prayer in kind of a miraculous way. We had the meeting, the case was presented to the congregation.
After all the accusations were leveled against us for funding a divisive movement and bringing Matt, up to Maine and being divisive ourselves, that accusation was made. I don't know what evidence they have for it. But after they gave those accusations, there's 4 of us being disfellowshipped, or at least 4 adults being disfellowshipped, and they asked us, or if we had any, or that we could respond, and they gave us 10 minutes for all 4 of us.
The pastor again said, we really don't want this to happen. We want you guys to be part of the body, but you have to lay this aside.
Right near the end of the session, right before they voted, the pastor said, from the pulpit, he said, we are asking you, talking to the four of us, we are asking you to lay down your conscience.
He started to say, we want you to lay your conscience aside. And I kind of sat up and I was thinking, did he really just say that?
And when he said it, we kind of looked at each other like, is anybody else hearing this? Like, the pastor's telling people to lay down their conscience and submit to the church.
And then he didn't just say it once, he said it again. We're pleading with you to lay your conscience aside.
I couldn't believe it. It was amazing.
And I just thought, who could ever do that? If our conscience is the voice of God to us, you're telling me to say no to what God is telling me to do? And I couldn't believe that it was happening, but boy, did it make me feel better about the stand that I was taking. Again, another affirmation that we were doing the right thing, because no, I'm not going to lay my conscience aside.
So we got disfellowshipped, and at when we were disfellowshipped, they asked us, do not come back to the church at all, and that none of them were going to contact us for 3 months.
So we ended up being voted out, but it was actually a really amazing experience. I'm sure that people that have gone through that have probably, that it's been bitter and painful. And it was painful, but at the same time, there was a lot of love and there was a lot of hugs and many tears shed, but really it was conducted, and I think with the best spirit that could be had. And I still, with my whole heart, believe that, the people in that church were doing what they think is right. I don't think that there was ill intent, but I think that unfortunately there is a great deception, and that people aren't really understanding what's happening.
I really believe God has taught me something through this, and that is, it doesn't matter how much you think you can rely on people, because Satan is a roaring lion. He's out looking for anybody that he can take down. And when that happened to us, we didn't think there was any way that our friends would not only disfellowship us, but actually not even think it to be okay to reach out, to make a phone call and ask us if we're okay, or to eat dinner with us or something like that. It's horrifying to think of that, but that just shows how strong the delusions of Satan really are.
I still think about our church family every day. I miss them. I love them. By God's grace, I don't hold any ill will. I see this as not the result of men, but I see this as the result of an enemy that we have that is trying to cause division and discord and is trying to hide the truth. So I pray every day that the truth will shine and that people will have the courage to step out in faith and look for themselves and not be afraid to look for themselves, not feel that there has to be some sort of a mediator or an educated person to distill things to them, but that God is the great teacher and that He will reward those who diligently seek Him. I wouldn't trade anything. I believe that God has had a purpose in this whole journey, that there have been trials and hardships, but at the same time, right along beside that has been the most beautiful experience and closeness with God that I've ever had. And so I just praise Him, and I wanted to share my story to encourage anybody out there who's maybe going through this situation right now. It is more rewarding to honor Him and to stand for the truth than it is to please men and to hold on to positions or comfort. There's more comfort in following wherever God leads. So I hope that this story has been encouraging, and we're praying for all of those out there who are going through this experience, because I know there are many.